Hi, my name is EJ Massa. I just finished watching the FX show Legion, which is the new X-Men show on FX. Now, if somebody came to me and said there's a new X-Men show on a TV show, I would have thought they would come up with something like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or something for network television. It would be pretty safe and maybe very episodic. And Legion is not that at all. For those of you who don't know, X-Men is like owned by Fox, or at least the movie rights, TV rights, I guess, are owned by Fox. And Marvel owns most other stuff, and Sony owns some other movie rights. So X-Men can't interact with all the Captain Americas and stuff like that. This is kind of X-Men's first live-action TV show, or at least Fox's take on it. And as a result, it's extremely ambitious for what it is. This series is showrun by Noah Hawley, who brought us the Fargo TV series. And this guy must be the busiest motherfucker ever, because I mean, Legion just finished. Now Fargo season 3 has started. He's working on a Cat's Cradle, Kurt Vonnegut series. It's like, slow down, slow down. Don't slow down, because I love your shows. Keep making them. Before I go on any further, I will talk generally about Legion, and then I'm going to move on to spoiler territory. So, in general, Legion is about a mutant, a very powerful mutant, who doesn't know how powerful he is because he suffers from some sort of mental illness, like schizophrenia or something, where he doesn't exactly know what's real, and he doesn't exactly remember using powers when he does use powers, and he doesn't know if he's just going crazy or if the things that he's actually making happen are happening. It's a very interesting premise where you don't know what's real. You're following this character who is probably the most powerful mutant and can't even use or control his powers. So, very interesting premise, but as a TV show, I'd be like, I don't know about that. The best way I can describe the feel of it is, if you've ever watched the TV show Hannibal, it had some experimental moments and experimental ways of telling stories. And there were some episodes that were really, really trippy, and you didn't know what was going on, what was reality, and this is a whole series of those trippy episodes. But still, there's some episodes that take place completely in memories or dreams, and there's some episodes that take place completely in this place called the astral plane. And so you spend a weirdly little time in the real world, and so there's a lot of interesting storytelling mechanics. Stylistically, it also is pretty unnerving because it takes place in this like timeless no man's land. Like, people are using some high-tech iPads, but everyone's dressed like the 70s, and there's 70s technology around too. So it's like, it doesn't take place in any, it doesn't seem like it takes place in any sort of time, but but I think it's modern because somebody mentioned using email at some point. So it takes a lot of really bold choices. I think the acting of the series is really great. The main character is played by Dan Stevens, who's in everything. He's in Beauty and the Beast, he's in this, he's gonna be in some like Charles Dickens movie, I think. And so he's everywhere now, and he's in this, and he's good. I mean, I saw Downton Abbey, and I didn't think he was very remarkable, but this actually makes me think more highly of him. He does a very good job towing the line between like the crazy and the sweet and the sinister, and he's able to juggle all that fairly well, and I think he does a good job here. Supporting cast is also really good. You have Jean Smart, who is actually in Fargo season 2. Thanks, Noah Hawley. And she does a good job as being kind of like a Professor Xavier sort of figure. She's a leader of this group of mutants that are like in a retreat called Summerland. It's like a 70s retreat. It's like an adult version of the School for the Gifted, where these mutants can like relax and figure themselves out and stuff like that. And she's good as that leader, like an authoritative figure. The female counterpart, love interest, I thought she was really good. She had a good style to her. I forget her name at the moment, but she plays Sydney Barrett, and I think she did very well. She I mean, I don't have any complaints about her. I think she was serviceable. The standout for me was Jermaine Clement plays Oliver, who is this guy who kind of lives in the astral plane, and he is amazingly like beatnik, trippy guy, and has some very good comic relief and has a very good presence. Him as a person, Jermaine like feels like he is a lost figure from the 70s, and him acting out as this like kind of like beatnik kind of personality is truly amazing. Aubrey Plaza is extremely good in this. I don't want to go too much into her character because it could be spoilers, but she's nuts and it's awesome. So pacing wise, I think the show, it was only 8 episodes, but I had a hard time kind of getting into the series. Like the pilot I thought was really good. It's a very, very good pilot. It draws you in with the 70s stylistic choices, the kind of the alternate storytelling, and the like, oh, is this really happening kind of stuff. But then also having a very good climax where you're like, oh, this is an X-Men show. These are mutants. There's a scene at the end where you really are like, oh, this is an X-Men show. And so it's a very good pilot. And then it kind of meanders for a couple episodes where there's 3 episodes, like 2 or 3 episodes where you don't get too much plot. There's a lot of developing of other things, but you don't get much plot, and so it's kind of frustrating for the next couple episodes after the pilot, where it's like, I still know the same information I do from the pilot. It takes a while to get going, and then once you get to like the 5th, 6th, and 7th episodes, it's bonkers. It's a bonkers show, but it's actually really, really good. And then the final episode's good too. It's not I don't think it's as strong as like the 7th episode. It does a Game of Thrones kind of thing where the 7th episode was the second to last episode is like really, really good, and then it kind of like falling action. I mean, there's still some action, but it's more falling action than the action that was happening before. So overall, I enjoyed the show. I thought it was an interesting take on to superhero shows. Like, we've gotten so many Netflix shows that all feel kind of the same. They have some stylistic differences, but I thought 8 episodes is probably just enough for a show like this. I don't think I would do more than 8. But overall, it's great. Noah Hawley did a great job on this one. But now I'm going to go into spoiler territory where I'm going to talk about some of the details of the plot. So it turns out that David, his schizophrenia is being caused by an ancient being called the Shadow King, who's played by Aubrey Plaza. Again, Aubrey Plaza is bonkers when she plays the Shadow King. So the Shadow King, basically infects David, and it's heavily hinted that the Shadow King was a former nemesis of Professor Xavier, and they battled it out on the astral plane, and then David is actually the son of Professor Xavier, and after Professor Xavier defeated the Shadow King, he kind of possesses David as sort of revenge. And they explain all this in a pretty amazing scene where there's like this blackboard scene where it's a very creative way to do exposition, where he's in his mind or in the astral plane trying to figure out why all this is happening to him, and he starts like reasoning it out on a chalkboard with another Dan Stevens who has a British accent, but it's not Dan Stevens' British accent. It's a different British accent. It's nuts. It's a very interesting scene where the blackboards start to animate and show the conflict, and there's a part where Dan Stevens does a Patrick Stewart impression, so it's heavily implied that this does take place either in the cinematic X-Men universe or a universe very similar to I know continuity doesn't matter too much to the cinematic X-Men universe, but it was a good nod. It was a good nod to that. Anyway, the Shadow King is this nemesis, and I thought the Shadow King was extremely unnerving. A very interesting villain. Like, he shows up earlier in the season, and you almost see him only in your peripheral vision. Like, you see hints of him, and it's always disturbing to see that little like like fat. The design on him is just so disturbing. And then he can change into other forms, and he has an Aubrey Plaza form, which is just like Beetlejuice. Like, especially toward the end, it gets very Tim Burton Beetlejuice, Johnny Depp, Edward Scissorhands look, and she does great there too. It's just a role that she can. They probably were just like, go nuts, Aubrey Plaza. Just chew the scenery. Just be as wacky as you want. And it works for her. It works for the as a villain. So it's an interesting villain. It's an interesting way of doing a villain that's, not exterior. There's the external villain of the government agency. I forget what they're called, like D3 or something. And I think they're fairly good. They have a villain in that group called the Eye, and I wish he was explored a little bit more. He's kind of just menacing and quiet, and you get a little bit of a hint at his backstory, but you don't get too much before he's killed. And then you also have the interviewer in the pilot episode comes back at the end of the series. The interviewer who's interviewing David and trying to get more info out of him, and then gets horribly burned by him. And then in the last episode, they do a neat thing where they kind of show the aftermath of that, where you realize that he has a family, he has like a husband and a adopted son, and you kind of see that, what he's actually fighting for, which is like he thinks mutants are like a risk to this family, a risk to the world, and he's going against, he's trying to eliminate them or contain them because he has good intentions. So that was a neat little nod. They didn't have to throw that in there, but they spent a good chunk of the last episode doing that, and I'm glad they did. They didn't have to, and it was good. Besides the pacing issues, I wish there was higher stakes. I mean, there's only one mutant that like really dies besides the Eye on the Summerland team. It's the telekinetic guy, and they didn't go into his backstory at all. Like, they didn't go into his, so it was pretty obvious that if somebody was gonna die, it would be him. So I thought maybe like Sydney was gonna die, Sid was gonna die, or Jean Smart's character was gonna die. But no, nobody really died besides the Eye and the telekinetic guy. The Shadow King at the end like infects Oliver, and that Jermaine Clement, and that seems like a great way to kick off the tone of the next season. If it's Jermaine and Aubrey Plaza, did I say Audrey or Aubrey? So if Jermaine Clement and Aubrey Plaza like are having adventures together and doing evil stuff, I think that would be hilarious. That'd be hilarious. I'm just gonna watch that show. Can we just make it that be the show? Dan Stevens is great and all, but I want to see those two all the time. I mean, my theory is that Oliver, when he was in the astral plane, he spent so much time in the astral plane that he might have been familiar with the Shadow King during those times, and maybe this was even part of his plan to get together with the Shadow King. I think that might be it, or that at least the Shadow King is familiar enough with him, and that he's a telepath, and he can do all that stuff, that the Shadow King chose him as a host for that reason. So it'll be interesting, and especially the dynamic that Oliver is Melanie, Jean Smart's character's husband. So there's like you're going after her husband, and so that might lead to some interesting stuff. And then also they do a mid-credits scene where Dan Stevens, after the Shadow King leaves him and he's hanging out with his girlfriend, he gets caught by a Pokeball for some reason, and then it flies away. I don't know why that happened, but it did. Another theory maybe would be that once the Shadow King leaves David's head, maybe other personalities start cropping up in his head. Like when he was in the astral plane, he was talking to his British version of himself. Maybe that's another personality, or maybe he starts to develop them. I think they should. It would be interesting if they go into like other mental illnesses. I think vaguely the comic he has a bunch of personalities in him, and I think that would be very interesting, especially to keep him less super powerful, because he's now that the Shadow King's out of his head, he's just the perfect beautiful mutant who has the best powers. Overall, interesting stuff. It gave me a lot. I don't read the comics. I don't know if this has anything to do with the Legion comic that's adapted from. I don't read comics in general, but as a show, it was very interesting. And I'm familiar with the X-Men Cinematic Universe, and I think this is probably the most interesting thing. And I think Marvel Studios and their Netflix shows should look at this show and at least come up with shorten their seasons, make them 8 episodes like this, and take some bigger risks. They all are starting to feel a little samey, and Iron Fist, I know Iron Fist kind of flopped a little. This is great television. It's peak television. Noah Hawley. Fargo starts soon, and I'm excited for that. I fucking love Fargo Season 2. Even the UFO. I don't care. X-Men. See it. Legion. Bye.